Fam Electric Ghost. Do I have Brown Boy on?
That's right.
Hey, so welcome to the program. We are recording.
How's it going today?
Going good. I was just doing some work on my Moog grandmother. So I see that you've got some sequential circuit stuff and some other hardware. So you're a synthesis, right? You're big time into that, right?
I'm really into synthesizers, absolutely.
Yeah. Yeah, it's cool to actually talk to someone, in this world where everybody's using soft synths, to actually see someone still using the hardware synths. That's always kind of in my heart. So glad to talk
Yeah,
to someone.
it's definitely different putting your hands on. Like I have a few software synths, especially that Arturia V collection. Very
Yeah,
nice, but it's
yeah,
different when you put your hands on it and can actually manipulate it that way.
yeah. That's a big thing. What I try to tell people, the one thing when you have like a Moog, or like a Prophet, is the fact that all those control surfaces are part of your instrument, and that's
Yeah,
how you actually can make your sounds. I'm gonna kind of come up from the '70s, with Emerson, Lake and Palmer and Stevie Wonder and Bernie Worrell, and when you watch them on a mini Moog, on a Prophet 5 or a Jupiter, or even a Hammond organ with the drawbars, it's
right.
like that's part of how you play.
And especially in the 70s had no MIDI. So it's not, what I like to do is definitely connect my DAW into some of my synthesizers to kind of get a
Perfect.
perfect on on the um, on the grid type recording. And it really helps. Like you can
Yeah,
make a loop and then adjust and make your patch based on that loop. But with the 70s, it was just all raw recording. And if you didn't get it right, you just had to do it
yeah,
again.
yeah. Sometimes you had like the early Moog, like Model 55s had sequencers and stuff on them, but they were all CV.
Right.
And it's kind of like sometimes I like to do LFO sequencing,
Yeah.
or you take a bunch of LFOs and you use that as the trigger, and then you create these kind of looping LFOs. But yeah, there's other stuff you can do. But we'll get into the interview exactly. So I sent you the questions. What we always like to ask the artists we talk to is like, when did you first get into music? Like what age? And then how we kind of progress to where you are now. So we start like at the beginning.
All right. So when I was 11, I saw Will Smith. There was a little beatboxing routine with Biz Markie in Men in Black 2. And I really got as deep as an 11-year-old could get into beatboxing, and I wanted to progress to the drums from there. My parents would not get me drums because you can't turn them off. So
Yeah,
I settled for guitar, and my first guitar was a Walmart First Act guitar. It was $148, and I remember that because they made me buy it myself. I had to do chores to save money to get a guitar. But I think that's a good thing because it really gave me an incentive to learn it. And from the guitar, I actually did get some drums. I got a bass, and like putting it all together is kind of how I got into recording. Like I wanted to play guitar and then bass and then drums on top of it.
So did you start using like Tascam and Fostic 4-trackers or something to put that together, or you were able to put it into something
No,
else?
my girlfriend at the time had a Mac that came with GarageBand. So GarageBand was my first,
Oh, so you did that.
and then I got out of recording after we broke up, and then after that, I got into a program called DrumPad 24. It's a free app on the iPhone, and I wanted to have like an actual physical thing, so I got an MPD 26, and that came with Ableton, and that's how I got involved with Ableton.
Cool. Yeah, it's
That
interesting
was
because I
actually
kind of started how you did chores to get your guitar. Like I had a comic book collection, and I sold it to get a Casio CZ101.
ooh man, that's the one synth I wish I could get my hands on, the CZ101. It does have
Yeah,
there's
yeah, and it's
the the Arturia V collection comes with the CZ, and
the CZ was like phenomenal because everybody thought it was a toy, but it actually was a pretty good synthesizer. And I was like, I sold a whole comic collection, all these like Marvel Fantastic Fours and stuff, just to get like $200 so I could buy it. and I got ripped off. But but I got the CZ, and then from there I moved up to like a Roland D5,
Nice.
which is like a dumbed down
Yeah.
D50. It's like a linear synthesis. It had that capability of a D50, but it wasn't as in depth. But it could do it. And then I got a Korg sequencer that had low disk
Oh
drive
yeah.
on it, and then a Tascam 4-tracker. So then I had like a little thing where I could just take all those linear synthesis, and that was a multi-trimble synth. So you could actually take the D5 and do like multi-trimble layering, like 128 voices or something.
Holy
And
cow.
so you could build like pretty heavy songs. And so I had a band, but everybody stopped showing up. And I said, well, I'm just going to put stuff together. And I'm in my 50s, so I grew up in the new wave era.
Oh
right?
yeah.
I grew up. I actually saw Joy Division, the video before he
Oh,
died.
lucky guy.
I saw like the beginning of it, like with Joy Division turned into New Order. You had the Cure and Echo and the Bunnymen and all those new wave bands. And I was like looking in the video, and like, what are they playing? Well, they're using the Mini Moog, or using the Prophet 5, or using the D50. I'm like, so I just would go to pawn shops and try to find stuff.
Yeah, I think the
And
80s is probably that new wave is probably the best era for music because it was all
yeah,
like live synthesizers, great energy, and people were just
yeah.
happy to make music.
What's cool about that era is like, a lot of people think those synth bands were all like just synth, but like you listen to like New Order, you listen to like The Perfect Kiss. That song is like it's like bass is the melody. The bass player's playing, and there's a lot of new wave bands. The bass is doing really heavy
You
melody,
still there?
and the guitar is kind of flirting. Hey, sorry about that. I don't know what happened. Luckily, the segments are saved, so and these are not recorded live together. Can you
Yeah,
hear
I
me?
got a phone call. Yep. Can you hear me?
Yeah. Maybe put it on Do Not Disturb. It'll trip the whole thing. It will just drop it.
All right.
So we're back. So what I was saying is like the new wave era. One of the cool things I was watching like a Jonathan Demme video for New Order and the song "Perfect Kiss," and they actually recorded that live. They did the video live and they actually played it. And if you watch a lot of new wave bands, like the bass is so much like it's like kind of like John Entwistle in the Who. The bass is really heavy in the melody of a lot of these new wave songs, even though there's all this synth going on and a lot of sequencing going on, but there's a lot of bass being the heavy melody component, and that was always like a interesting thing for me watching videos back in the day when you actually saw
Yeah,
videos.
back when MTV
But
was music television.
yeah, it was real. So when did you decide that you wanted to write your own music? I mean, you saw all these, well, you saw that you got introduced by watching that program. But when did you feel like you were gonna do it? Would I right when you picked up the guitar? Then you said I'm gonna write my own stuff.
Yeah, and I mean that's pretty much how I took off. I didn't really learn anyone else's songs, to be honest. I still don't know how to play most stuff. I know how to play Stairway to Heaven, but pretty much everything I write is all my own stuff. So that's when I started writing music. When I started recording music was 16.
Wow. So that's interesting because a lot of people they'll start off with a cover band and they'll be playing like their heroes playing Zepp, playing like the AC/DC or whatever. But I was kind of like you. I was like I started a band when I was like 16, and I was inspired by like the Who and the Clash, and I'm like, well, okay, if the Sex Pistols and the Clash can just go out there and do punk, and the Ramones are doing what they were doing at CBGB's, I got all these kids in high school say we're gonna do the same thing, right? And we
Nothing
were
wrong with
writing
that.
our own stuff because we were kind of because we were like that's the whole punk movement was this idea. You listen to Black Flag or Who's Could Do or something, or Replacements. Like you can just do it yourself. That you're not trying to be Jimmy Page.
Yeah,
But and I think that's a really cool thing today. You see it now with all the hip hop guys and all the synth wave and DJs. Everybody's like learning how to just do it themselves. But it's like when you realized you had a talent for music. Who were your inspirations? Like who were your influences or reference points?
when I started listening to music or actually making it, I was not allowed to listen to anything but country music, which sounds like a disaster. Um, so that's probably one of the reasons why I never learned other songs because I really didn't like country music. But my parents didn't like the music that was on the radio.
Didn't like anything. Yeah.
So I didn't really have too many inspirations. One of the inspirations, one of the reasons I wanted to play music was because I thought my dad could play guitar because he had a guitar, but it turns out he has no clue
Mhm.
how to play guitar. So
He just
um,
had
yeah,
it.
he just had it. It was like decoration. My current influences are definitely like Mandalorian. I don't know if you've seen him on Instagram.
Yeah,
He's
yeah.
yeah, so Mandalorian, Sahab is definitely a big influence of mine. Just different people on Instagram right now.
That's interesting because more kind of modern influence. Like, I mean, I grew up back in the day. I'm a child of the '70s, and I was a lot of what's going on in my household was like there was a big love for music. My dad was a big Motown guy.
Nice.
And, he had like everything from Motown that you could ever get. My older brother is like 7 years older than me, so he had all the Zeppelin and the Hendrix and all that stuff. And so the house was just full of vinyl, and so it was kind of easy to get into. And they allowed us to create bands and play in the basement, so we didn't have any kind of restrictions. So that's kind of open. But it's interesting that I have run into artists that have had those restrictions that but kids tend to rebel
Of course.
and want to do something different than what their parents are telling them to do. But country music is interesting because I grew up. My parents my mom was from Appalachia, from Morgantown, West Virginia.
Nice.
So my grandpa, he just he was playing like Hank Williams and Johnny Cash,
Well,
and Waylon
that's
Jennings,
real country
all
music
that
for
stuff.
sure.
Yeah,
I don't
yeah,
dislike real
that I
country music.
appreciate.
The stuff that has a story behind it, but the modern pop country music is just
Oh yeah,
formulaic
that's
and
not what I'm into. Folsom Prison. That's like my favorite albums. Like I'm gonna live from Folsom Prison. That's to me. That's the real deal. Um, Johnny Cash, but yeah, because I like all genres. I mean, I listen to modern trance and side trance and anything that's out there. But like again, being a hardware synth guy, watching guys like Keith Emerson with his big stack of
yeah.
Moogs, that was like kind of what like I've tried to recreate in my house
Yeah, I'm getting there.
with all my Moogs.
I have a ton of
Yeah,
synths. I need to rack them up at some point.
yeah. It's just that like I think what's interesting about being a synthesist is that half the day I spend just building the sound. I was just coming off my Moog grandmother using a sample and hold circuit to make like kind of rotating patch. And I'm going with all my CV controlled stuff. So I've got like a Mother 32 and a DFAM and a grandmother and an Arturia Mini Brute 2S. And I've got them all synced up with like Make Noise Math Module and a Morphogene. And I've got all this stuff and I'm kind of cross fading, just running LFOs from one synth into another and just creating all this kind of madness. And I'll spend like hours just trying to create a patch, and then create the song from that patch. It's a 5-minute song after 3 hours worth of work.
I mean, honestly,
But
that's kind of what drew me to synthesizers because, like, when you get a synthesizer, it's not one instrument. Like, you get a guitar, it makes guitar sounds. You get a bass, it makes bass sounds. Piano, piano. But when you get a synthesizer, it could be a pad, it could be a bass, it could be a lead. That's
yeah, yeah.
definitely a utilitarian instrument, and that's kind of the fun, just
Well,
making your own sounds.
what did you like? Did you like the idea of synthesizers? Because like what I found is like I was in a band, and then everybody stopped showing up. So then I was like, well, okay, now I got the synth. I can play bass. I can do the drums. I can do strings. I can do guitar. Then I can like write the whole thing, and I don't have to wait for the guys to show up. So was it that you been in a band and then you said, I just want to do everything myself, or you said, well, I'm going to do everything myself from the start?
I've been in a few bands, but nothing that really kind of like materialized. Nothing that like really coalesced into like a music entity. Just kind of like jamming around with friends. How I got into synthesizers was when I got Ableton. It was a light version, and they didn't really have like very good synthesizer. Ableton has some incredible native um, plugins,
Yeah,
but
yeah.
the one I had, I think I had sampler, had a drum rack, and nothing really like synthy. So my first synth was the Arturia Micro Brute, and I just wanted it for basses and
Okay.
leads and stuff. And I just fell in love with synthesis from there.
Yeah, the micro boot, that's a really cool entry synth. It kind of reminds me of like my CZ101 because it's like very basic, but it just, you can really get a lot of it. I actually moved up from one of those to a 2S, the mini
Yeah,
brute with the, but it's just like, I like the state variable filter on it compared to like the Moog. It's got the classic ladder filter, but the state variable filter, you can do a lot of cool stuff with that thing. Um, And this is Arturias. It's like every synth has a different tone. Like my Rolands don't sound like Arturias. Arturias don't sound like Moogs. Prophets don't sound like, Arturias. Like they all have their own. It's kind of like I try to tell guitar players that don't really know synths that, every synth has its own kind of tone. And it's like there's a reason to get like a mini Moog from '74 and then one from like '77 because they don't sound
yeah.
the same.
It drives
Because
my wife
and
crazy because I
you
have
know
so many different synths. And she's like, "What's the difference? It's a synth." I'm like, It's not just a synth. They sound different. They do different things.
yeah.
Their envelopes are different."
Yeah, it's like Moog. Yeah, every Moog they've released actually has something about it that makes it unique. And so you go from year to year and they don't sound the same. And there's a reason to get it because it does things that the other one doesn't do. you know, so you're like, yeah, my wife does the same thing. It's like, why do you need that? You already got one. It's like, well, it's not exactly like
I don't
that.
have this. Yeah, you could really see
yeah,
the difference. Like the baby Juno, the JU06A, has
yeah,
that
yeah,
switch that you can flip to change it from a Juno 60 to a Juno 106. You could hear it's a big
yeah,
difference. It's
yeah. It's massive. There's sense if you go back, like you said, the 60 and the 106. A
yeah,
Jupiter 8 and a Jupiter 6. I mean, a Jupiter 6 is kind of a dissonance machine. It doesn't
yeah.
act like a Jupiter 8 at all. It creates all this dissonance. And some people say we can't use it. Well, if you're doing experimental stuff like a Brian Eno, you can. It's very kind of dissonant. It does a lot of really strange, weird stuff that's not like typical, not stuff you do on a gig, stuff that's more experimental. But a lot of people like that's a very underrated synth. The Jupiter 6 does like very strange modulation capabilities on it that like, and no one seems to be like, everybody's into the Jupiter 8, but the Jupiter 6 can do some really freaky things.
The Jupiter 8,
but
I think a lot of people are into it because it was so expensive and so out of reach for a lot of people.
yeah,
So it
but
just
it has
kind
that
of,
classic sound,
oh yeah,
you
for
know.
sure, a mythical property to it that you know about it, but you probably never seen one in person. You know you'll never own like an original Jupiter 8.
Yeah.
So
Well, it's like kind of like a Prophet 5. You could only do 5 voices, and then when you get to the 8, finally you can do 4-finger chords.
yeah,
And I think that's where in the heart of the new wave, you see get Duran using it real heavy because they're doing all these chord progressions that no one was really able to get to, except unless they sat there with the mini Moog and they overdubbed it. And then the Prophet 5 gave it, but then you can only do like an octave and then maybe a 3-chord, hand. And once you got to the 8 voice synths like Oberheim's and the Jupiter 8s, then it was like, wow. Then you started getting these lush pats.
game changer.
It's total game changer. That's and then the DX7 kind of killed it by doing the FM synthesis, which doesn't sound the same.
No,
And it's kind of tinny, and kind of the engineers loved it because it seemed like I heard a story that the engineers didn't like the analog synths because they said it took up too much bandwidth in the mix,
oh yeah,
and it
I could
does.
see that. Yeah, for sure.
It does, and so then it's like it's not as discreet, and so they didn't like it. But then it's like, okay, well, that's is it your job to decide what things should be? Because there's a big difference in the '70s. Big mono synth tones till you get to D50s and DX7s, you lose it. And now people are bringing it back, but it's like music lost a lot with when the monophonic and the big analog polysynths got pulled out of the mix. But yeah, that's just my complaint. But so your writing style, would you just say it's kind of like you're synth wave, or you're kind of more just alternative or new wave? What would you say it is? Because it's hard to pin down a genre. I always ask people, and then people say, "Well, I don't want to be pinned down.
Yeah, I don't I just kind of go with the flow. I like to refer to the genre that I make as space funk because it's definitely a little bit more funky than just lo-fi, but it's definitely not 100% on the grid, especially with the drums. So like it's kind of hard to say, but it really just I sit down, I make a synth loop, um, probably lay it drums on, then bass, then a lead, and then that's a Brown Boy track right there.
Yeah, it's interesting because the space funk is kind of like I'm a big fan of like Funkadelic, and they were kind of like the space cowboys of synthesis, and also that's why I kind of called my brand of music expansive sound, because I felt like, well, if I call it expansive, it means like everything,
Yeah.
and then you can just like, so one day I'm feeling some Sun Ra, another day I'm feeling some Johnny Cash, and I try to bring some punk aesthetic and try to do a Black Fat Flag kind of Nine Inch Nails, punkish thing. And so you kind of go wherever you're gonna go. And I like a lot of punk bands, like the Ramones and stuff. And it is, well, that's not synth music, but I think that punk aesthetic is in a band like Joy Division and early New Order and Depeche Mode have that kind of punk aesthetic. It kind of comes out of that. And so having a little punk edge is not like, really deviating from the spirit, because a lot of new wave bands came out of punk bands.
Yeah, it's really crazy how punk was like just I'm gonna do it myself. I'm gonna do it how I want to do it. And I think that's the kind of attitude that musicians have now. I'm gonna do it. I'm not trying to be big. I'm just trying to get my music out there, and I'm gonna do it my way. And I'm not. And you don't need a record label anymore if you want to make money.
No,
And so I think that kind of spirit is definitely alive and well right now.
yeah, that's why I like to interview people kind of in the underground market, like the Instagram world, which I find Instagram is the best source. I mean, every interview I've done since 2018 has been a band or a musician I found on Instagram, or SoundCloud or something like that, and it really is where everything's going on. Being a musician for like 30 years, I find that like most of the new stuff is happening in places like Instagram and SoundCloud, those in YouTube. That's where the cool music is happening. The stuff I want to hear. And I'm been in this a while. I'm in my 50s, but I like hearing people, experiment. I grew up with college radio, and that's how I found things back then. Between college radio and MTV, that's how I found REM. That's how I found Joy Division, New Order, because the radio wasn't playing it.
Yeah, no,
and
they wouldn't.
and so this is kind of where I like to be, because music is the top 10 is cool for certain people, top 50, but that's not where I see the innovation happens where we are. That's where people try new things. You don't listen to the A&R guy trying to tell you to clone
Yeah.
the last top 10 hit, because that's all happens in the industry. They just want to clone something to death.
Yeah, when you don't have to worry about the modern sound or trying to having someone breathing down your neck to make this type of thing or take that out, or you got to make sure this is in there. It's creativity, and when you do stuff like that with mainstream stuff, you're an artist, but I like art that's more creative, more or less limits. The only limits that you have are the limits that the artist put on themselves. And that's kind of why it's so nice to have SoundCloud or an Instagram, because literally anyone in the world with an internet connection can put their music out there. And if it's good, people will like it, and it kind of draws people in.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of great artists, if you think about like, just like hip hop, you get these like collectors that somehow, they were on YouTube. Like a big famous one, he said, Tyler the Creator, Earl Sweatshirt, Odd Future. They were just totally off the grid, doing whatever they wanted. They ended up creating their Camp Flogna and create this whole new alternative thing. And they were, they're hip hop, but they like everything. And so the Camp Flogna kind of crowd is like they're bringing not just hip hop bands together, but all these bands together. And it's just because they were willing to try something different, and they were outside the box. And now they're kind of mainstream, but they didn't start that way. They started because they just had ideas and they were going to do whatever they want. They threw their mixtapes out on the net, and boom. And I think that's what's going on today with everybody just able to get their mixtape out. Back in the day, you just sell it as a cassette in the back of your trunk. You show up at the barbershop and say, "Hey, you want to hear this?" You play at the pizza shop and then hang out pass out cassettes. But now you can actually get your track, if somebody in like Brazil is listening to your music, and you're like, what, what Argentina is like, what the heck? Like your reach is like wherever it is, and your fans can be anywhere.
Yeah, what's so crazy is like now it's easier than ever and also harder than ever because there's a lot more noise that you have to cut through.
Yeah, that's why things like this podcast, where I found it, like as a musician, this podcast I found is a way to get my own music out there, because then I'm talking about other musicians, but it kind of pushes my music in a different way. So finding ways to get out there, doing like sync licensing, or producing other bands, or playing on other people's records, or doing engineering for people. That's how you kind of have to work today. You have to put out as much stuff as you can, and work with as many people as you can, and get your stuff out there. So there's a lot of noise, but you can kind of differentiate yourself if you start finding little niches,
Yeah, I
to
mean,
do.
so you have to do something that's unique that other people aren't really doing. That's kind of why it's hard to say who the inspiration is, because I'm not sure anyone really is doing the exact same thing that I'm doing.
Yeah, that's kind of what I like about the individualism of like the independent artist, is like you're not trying to be the next whatever. You're just into your own sound, and you're perfecting it. And I was listening to Strange Drugs, and I like the kind of, like, you have this style that I like a lot, that actually sounds like a lot of DAW-less recorders. I know you're using a DAW, but I like the fact that you're willing to not try to make it so clean that it's like not real.
Yeah,
Yeah, I think there's some people with the DAW have kind of not utilized it in the way I would, or the way I do. It's like I use it to help construct something, but I don't want to over produce it or make it so tight that it doesn't have any life in it.
yeah, that's so when I record stuff, like I put myself into my music. So when something's not perfectly on the grid, that's me. That there I am. So I mean, obviously I can just quantize everything and make it sound super tight and dial it in and automate it to the nth degree, but I'm really just more about the vibe.
Yeah, well, I think that's the thing about rock. The kind of rock music I liked. I like bands like the Velvet Underground. Bands like Big Star or Neil Young and Crazy Horse. And the
Yeah.
thing about even like Neil Young, like the difference between when he would do a Nashville recording like Harvest, like it was perfect pitch, perfect. Everything's like, slide guitar, everything's like perfect, right? But then when he gets into Crazy Horse, it's like he's the grandfather of punk. Crazy Horse songs are just, they're a little bit out of key. Beat's not always perfect. It's a little off. And the thing is about that is like that the imperfection of Crazy Horse is like perfection. Because it's like punk attitude even before punk. And
Yes,
kind of a
it's
lot of
kind of a
punk bands
paradox.
will cite Neil as their inspiration. He's like considered like the godfather of punk, because you get Nirvana and Pearl Jam and tons of punk bands will name check Neil because his stuff kind of predated their stuff. And it, to me, it's like they kind of understanding that the honesty of your music doesn't mean you need to do 50 takes to make it perfect. That sometimes that first or second or third take is actually the original intention of what you wanted to do. And if you keep on trying to clean it up, you actually are hiding the truth.
Yeah, you're not cutting through. Like obviously, you can go into a Beach Boys level of perfection.
Or Phil Spector. Yeah, Phil
Y-
Spector type stuff.
Yeah, but honestly, by the 50th take, do you want to do it anymore? Probably not. It's not fun anymore.
Yeah, I mean, because you're pulling the lifeblood out of it. And I understand, like, Born to Run is this kind of wall of a sound masterpiece, and it took them 6 months. And multiple overdubs, tons of changes, but it's kind of torturous, you know.
Yeah.
And it's a really cool song, but like sometimes, like if I listen to like Nebraska, and doing that 4-track demo of Atlantic City is actually a little more honest, you know, from Bruce. So it's like, okay, I understand what happens when you overproduce and you can make something, but do you really need to do that in every track? And I've gone and done things where, okay, I took 3 months to do a track and I did like 50 overdubs or whatever. But you know, that's because I wanted to do it, but it's like I don't want to do that every time.
Oh yeah.
Some
I couldn't
projects
imagine.
demand. I mean, some projects you get to a point where like, okay, I'm trying to do something and it demands that, but like I'm not gonna do that in everything. You know, I'm gonna, you know, like it's kind of like each song you serve the song. However, you know, one day you use a sampler, next day it's like it's all gonna be Moog. It was gonna be my Les Paul because it's like that's what the song needs. And you do whatever it needs. You know.
Yeah, when you get to that level of perfection too, it's kind of hard to play it live without
Oh yeah,
people
you
going
can't
like,
even do
yeah,
it.
right, like, oh, so you're a studio band.
Yeah, it was like that with Steely Dan for many, many years. They got to this point, and I love Steely Dan, but it's like they couldn't reproduce those songs, so they never played it
Yeah,
live
Steely Dan was
because it would
actually
take.
who I was thinking of when I was talking about that perfection, getting everything perfect. Steely Dan
Yeah,
was the exact one because
yeah, they're the
they
kings of
switched
that.
artists and yeah, they wanted to make sure it was absolutely perfect. But I mean,
They
that's
didn't
their
even
art
have a
style.
band.
That's cool.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of like what the Beatles did with George Martin. You know, when they stopped touring, they became like a studio band, and that's cool. And you create a piece of art, but it's very hard to reproduce. I mean, Steely Dan eventually was able to get back on the road and reproduce it, but they had to rehearse like hell to do it. But you know, is this to me? It's like when you think about it, there's a story about the Who for Tommy, and when they were writing Tommy, they said we could do all these overdubs, but we want to play it live. So they actually made the choice not to do the overdubs, so they could actually play the rock opera live with 4 guys and not have to bring anybody else in. Um, and I think that's kind of a lesson that you know some people don't learn today. but it's like can you actually reproduce that live without all your sequencers and all your stuff? Can you do it with the guys you got? And you know, some bands can, some bands have to use those backing tracks. And you know, it's a different age today. You know, everybody that's like an EDM DJ, it's all backing tracks. But you know, there's something about like giving yourself a limitation and working within that.
Absolutely.
So in the album Strange Drugs, how did come about as a record? Because so many people do singles today, and that's all they do. But you've got like a 10-song album. What did you want this to be thought of as like an album, like the way albums in the '70s are to be looked at as a complete work that you should listen to like as like in one setting, or how did you come about with the whole idea for this record?
Yeah, I mean, if you look at the titles of Strange Drugs, it's pretty much a guy has a girlfriend. She breaks up with him. He does a lot of strange drugs, and he finds peace.
So it's telling a story, like the typical album format is like telling that story, and that's why you want it presented as an album, right?
Exactly. I like kind of put all this stuff together, and Brown Boy kind of came together from that. Like I had this whole collection of stuff. I never sat down and said, I'm going to tell this story, but that's kind of the story that came out of it. Like
Mm-hmm.
writers, I don't think when a writer sits down, they're going to say, all right, I'm going to use this motif. Most artists do anyway. And then they have you sit down in
Yeah,
class and say, oh, well, this is a reoccurring motif. Like that might not be the way that the writer actually intended it. Like I never intended it to be that way. It just kind of came out in that way.
yeah. I think it's interesting. Sometimes you start a project, you know, you might have all these things there. Yeah, you have like a lot of songs lying around, and then as you write more, you start to see, okay, well, this one works with this other
Yeah.
one, and then this mood is driving me to create another song. And it's what I find is like sometimes when you do an album, you'll have phrases from one song that kind of creep into another song, recurring themes, and you say, "Oh yeah, that works." And you maybe didn't plan it, but it starts to evolve. That okay, yeah, this stuff is gonna work, and I'm gonna start like tightening it up. As you get closer to the end of it, then you kind of once you're in the middle of it, you can see the beginning, you can see the end, and you're like, okay, I now I know what this is.
Yeah, that's
you know.
absolutely how it came out. And I honestly, that's not the way I like to make music. I would rather do a single, then an EP, then another EP, then another EP, and then an album. But I just
Hmm.
had all the material. It all just felt right. So that's kind of just dropped a whole album.
That's interesting because a lot of bands I talked to today, they're kind of on the single train that, and then maybe they'll do an EP of collected singles. Just because the way the market is, the market is kind of driven by a singles market. It's kind of like the '50s, like back in the Motown day, you know, all they did was singles, and then once they had enough of them, then they put the album out.
Yeah, you got to stay
But
relevant. You got to, stay persistent. The only issue is like with most albums, um, they're not all singles. To be honest,
yeah, yeah. The whole
there's
idea of an album is there are gonna be songs that aren't gonna be hits.
exactly.
They're part of like a theme. They're the interior tracks. They kind of make the feel it out. And in the market, today it's not as accepting of that. Maybe EPs are doing okay, so you could have the EP with a couple songs that aren't like bangers or whatever. But yeah, I'm kind of a child of the '70s, so like most of my stuff is album oriented projects, and I do tons of singles, but like they'll end up on the album, and they were part of the album. But yeah, it's a strange way things are being done today. Um, there's kind of like everything's happening at once. You've got guys bringing back new wave, guys into punk, got traditional rock and roll bands. Like everything, everybody's the rock is dead. But I could name like 10 up and coming rock bands that kick ass. That maybe not everybody knows about, but it's not dead. There's still stuff happening. So it seems like every genre is out there all at once.
Yeah, everyone's still represented for sure. All that music that you love from like people are even doing doo-wop still. It might be like a
Yeah.
modern doo-wop, but it's still there.
Yeah, guys, I was listening to a band that actually sounded like funkadelic, and it sounded like Sly and the Family Stone, and I could have sworn it was like a '74, and it's actually a brand new band out of LA, and they sound just like a funk band, and like a real funk soul band, like really deep, and they actually seemed to have recorded fully analog. They purposely recorded live. They didn't do a lot of overdub. They did it kind of old school, and it sounds like the '70s because they actually recorded that way, and it was all new stuff. And so it was interesting. They were channeling like Curtis Mayfield and Sly and Funkadelic, and it was all new stuff. But you could see where they were coming from, and then people were like really excited because like wow, they can do that, and it's not like they're just a cover band. They're actually doing new material. Um, so that it's interesting today. Like everything is kind of open out there. We get people even doing like 1920s, you know, like flapper stuff. My daughter was like into this
It's
band that was doing like
definitely
this
important in lo-fi.
1920s. Yeah, he was like, wow, it's like everything goes. But so what are you working on now for 2021?
I'm just working on putting a EP together and then a live set that I can actually perform out whenever this COVID is all done.
Yeah. So when you perform, had you been performing as a brown boy prior to COVID, or did you start this like? Did you ever get a chance to perform live as brown boy?
Uh, Not as Brown Boy. I've done talent shows as myself. I've done open mic nights, but Brown Boy just kind of came about in September.
Mm-hmm.
I've been doing these kind of
Oh, okay.
tracks for probably since the lockdown. I started making these tracks before I was making like trap beats, and that was fine. It just didn't feel authentic to me because I'm not super into trap music. Like I know how to make it, and people do enjoy the music that I make, but it didn't feel authentic, and I didn't really have the opportunity to use all my synths the way I wanted to. So
Yeah,
I just made a single track that I really digged, and it just felt organic and authentic to me. So I just moved forward with that, and then that's how Brown Boy came about.
that's interesting because I've seen some, DJs and EDM guys are evolving because it's kind of what I found, in that genre is it kind of has an aspect of disco where it could kind of die because it kind of some of the because I think the problem is like the formula is so restrictive that it doesn't allow the creativity to get out of it. And once you are a musician and you're like musicians like to evolve, and so if you want to like okay, I
Yeah,
want to evolve out of it, it's hard in that genre to evolve and people accept it because they want it to be a certain way. Um, and so you have to kind of do a hybrid and change it. So, well, I'm going to change this, and whether you still accept me, I don't know. I'm going to move into this other. But yeah, it's just interesting because to me, electronic music, the whole thing about it originally is experimental, and so
yeah,
it tends to evolve. It tends to go, forward, back, middle, everywhere. And to put a restriction into electronic music to me was like, okay, why are you doing that? But I'm kind of an old school guy.
very
But
rock and roll.
yeah, it's just to me, it's like you gotta just take it where it's gonna go. Like the Doors. Just open your mind, just do it. And the whole idea is like mixing poetry with music. It's Jim Morrison's whole thing. And then taking what you can do with like a punk aesthetic or a hard rock aesthetic or metal aesthetic. Like what Trent Reznor did, showing that the synths don't have to just be kind of happy, flourishing stuff. They can be madly aggressive. That you can approach it like a punk rocker or a heavy metal band and really kick ass. And some people don't see it that way, but I think you can have that kind of edge, and that's what I enjoy. People who push the envelope and try different things, and it's cool what you're doing is that you expand in music,
I
which is
appreciate it, man.
going into this with space. I mean, the idea of space is kind of like Sun Ra and Funkadelic, this Bootsy Collins and the space base. I mean, the whole idea like universal cosmic stuff has been in music forever. So what are your feelings? I know we talked about a little bit about like streaming services and the music industry. It's kind of like a double-edged sword that you kind of talked about. But what are your kind of feelings about the pros and cons of it?
The pros are getting paid, right? Everyone likes to get money for their art. So you kind of have to do business with like streaming services like Spotify and Apple Music, but Bandcamp is definitely going to be um, that underground, that indie way to get money. So you can always put yourself on Spotify. There's a lot of people on Spotify, and that might help you connect with people. But the modern music industry, I don't think anyone's, maybe people are, but none of the people that I know are searching for a contract or a label or anything like that. And it's nice if it happens, but um, just doing it yourself. That's that whole rock and roll attitude. Like I'm going to do it my way, and no one's going to tell me how to do it. And I can release whenever I want to release. And there might be less money, but it's definitely a lot more fulfilling.
Well, I find what's cool about it, like if you back in the day, right, you would try to get on an indie label, right? But if you didn't, get a hit, you dropped after two or three records,
Yeah,
and then you owe them money.
exactly. Isn't that a
And
nightmare?
then so yeah, so then it's like then your band dies and you can't even do it anymore, and you're all burned out. But with this kind of market, with to do it yourself, you can kind of have a micro level of success. You're able to, let's say, if I sell, a couple thousand vinyls out the back of my trunk, I can actually make more money than I do on a label.
Yeah.
If I do a couple of shows in New York City and Boston, I can actually validate why I'm doing this because I can
Yeah,
actually get paid.
that's what's so it's almost like a cowboy thing. Like just it's the Wild West in the music industry right now. Ever since streaming services, I think the big disruption was like LimeWire. and Kaza and Napster.
Yeah, Napster. Yeah, they
Uh,
kind of blew it out because these guys were like, they were had held the keys to the kingdom. They, they held the door. They kept you from They had the gatekeeper, right? You
yeah,
couldn't even get into the studio. You couldn't get anything recorded without going through their system. You had to buy into all their payola and all this stuff. Um, and now, you can run a micro batch of vinyl and make more money than most record deals.
yeah.
If you market and you sell it right. So
That's the
and
biggest
so this,
part.
you know,
I think the modern music industry requires like a lot more work, a lot more business know-how, like marketing,
yeah.
branding. That's a big part of the modern music industry. So if you want to do it yourself, you're going to have to take on a lot more responsibilities than.
And even if you blow up on YouTube and some big label comes to you, the problem with the label is like, the chances. This is the problem with the label, and like this is the story from Prince, right? Prince was on Warner Brothers. Everybody knows it, right? He negotiated this deal to make $100 million, but it was based on him being able to sell 6 million copies of a record for every release for the next 8 releases. Well, the only record to ever hit that was Purple Rain. Every record after that was way under that. And the idea that he'd ever actually hit 6 million again, you don't do that. The Eagles only have one Hotel California.
Yeah,
You know, Fleetwood Mac only has one Rumors. Almost every band has their peak album, and then they never make any more money. They never sell that level again, usually.
yeah.
And so to make your deal based on some kind of unrealistic goal is what the industry does. And so it's that you come into a label and you suddenly have this million selling record. Well, the chances of that your next record's going to do that is like zip. And
That's
so
that's the
the
double-edged sword of really figuring out how to do it yourself because um, you don't have any like crooked people trying to get you, and you figure out what a royalty is, what a mechanical is. You know what I mean? You have to
yeah,
figure out how to what the best deal for you is. So if you do sign, like say someone taps you to do a soundtrack for their indie movie, and you have to figure out a mechanical. If you get a piece of every video that's sold, if you
yeah.
how streaming works into that, like if it sells on iTunes or Amazon, do you get a piece of that? Um,
Yeah, you just got to have a contract where you own your master,
yeah,
you own your copyright, that you get a percentage, and it's like okay, and then you got guys trying to take 70, and you're the writer, and they want you to get 30, and they're like that right there is like a no start.
yeah. So I mean,
It's
but
like
that's the benefit of having to do it yourself. If you are really committed to being a musician and you figure out how the business actually works, you don't have to depend on um, people that don't necessarily have your best interest at heart. You can
yeah, you
see
get to
what a
flip
good
the
deal
switch.
is.
Like yeah, you get the 70 and they get 30.
Yeah,
That's how you work the deal. It's like okay, if you want it, that's what you get.
yeah.
You know.
When I was selling trap beats, some of these contracts were just ridiculous. It's intentionally convoluted, so you can't really um, figure out what they're trying to say. So that's
Most of the time, they want to own the master. They want to own it for forever.
yeah. No one owns my masters but me.
Yeah, and then they want to give you like 50-50, or they want to do 70-30, and they're like, I've seen some of them. I looked at them back in the day. I did do one time that was like a 50-50, but then I didn't. It was BS because the problem with is accounting. Back in the day, a couple of years, 10 years ago, I did one, and in the accounting was really effed up because they you had to get your own accountant to challenge theirs because they always want to undercount the plays.
Oh yeah,
They want to undercount the sales, and that's why a lot of people go on indie. Even big bands like Pearl Jam and Radiohead, because they had to sue their record companies on the counts
yeah. I think
because
there's
they
a
started lying on the counts.
you have to register with I forget the service, but you have to register um, with it's like someone's name, like Charles or something like that, and they are the third party that will do the counts. So if there's any
Yeah, yeah.
disagreement, you go to that service and they do the count for you.
Yeah, I mean, I'm in BMI, you know, and then I did have a service that does the counts for me. Yeah, so it's yeah, you do have to do it. You have to check them, and the thing is, it's like, okay, you guys can't be honest. Like right from the start, you got an industry that like wants to undercount. I mean, it even goes to like I go to New York and my roadie's got to count the people coming in because the guy running the restaurant wants, you know, he's paying me about how many people come in the drinks and stuff. And so my guy counts 300 people, and he tells me 220 came in.
Mm,
You know,
very
so
interesting.
that's kind of the kind of stuff they do, and it's across the board. So it's like it's good everybody's going indie, and you gotta protect yourself, you know, as a musician and an artist. And it's, you know, I know a lot of artists don't want to get into business. That's why they're not business people.
Yep.
But you have to have a certain level of business.
Yeah, you have to be able to have a conversation at least with someone that is a business person. Otherwise,
Somebody you
they'll take
trust.
advantage
Yeah,
of you too.
yeah. You got to get somebody to either represent you that you trust, or to review stuff for you. You know, that you trust, that is going to give you the right advice, because it's like part of your work. You know, if you love what you're doing, part of it is to know, it's to keep it protected, not get ripped off, and get what you deserve. You know,
Yeah.
um, so I think that's a big part of it. But so, are you working with other bands? A lot of people today do production work for other people, or they collab. Have you been working with anybody else, or going to
Uh,
plan on working with anybody?
no, not really. I just make my own stuff. I do have a sample pack that's out, but if you want to sample my stuff, that's fine
That's
with
cool.
me. I don't really care, especially with the ambient stuff. I don't ever really plan on publishing any of that. So if you feel
Mhm.
like, and several people have, if you want to make a trap beat or you want to do some electro to it, that's absolutely fine.
That's awesome.
That's really how I collab with people. People take my samples and then flip it into
Yeah, you
something else.
flip into something else. That's interesting. Yeah, I think that's cool. I mean, I've kind of been not in heavy into sampling as much as like a lot of people today, because I just am so much into this, like just using my own gear to create stuff. But yeah, I do appreciate it because I'm a big fan of hip hop, and I do like when you get to like a band like De La Soul or early Public Enemy, is like the level of sampling and the artistry with it, like what you can do when you know what you're doing.
Yeah,
Is
Kanye West is a crazy guy, but honestly, the way he flips samples is like really
yeah,
incredible.
yeah.
I
Work on
wouldn't
the
I wouldn't trust him with anything else, but if I need someone to flip a sample, Kanye is probably going to be the first person I'd look at.
yeah, yeah. I mean, I like the way he does that. I like Earl Sweatshirt lately. I like what he's been doing. He's been doing kind of like an MF Doom level
Yeah.
stuff. And that kind of style has always been like I totally appreciate that. I can't even get anywhere near that. I don't know how, I don't really dive into that, but I do appreciate when I hear it. But so are you, so you said you were gonna do some live shows when you can get out there. Like I think like I'm trying to get out there. I'm working with a booker, but it's like my booker is like in England.
Oh yeah.
And
Sheesh.
I can't like I signed with him just before COVID, and we were supposed to go do stuff in Berlin and London, and then boom, COVID happened and I can't go. But now he's calling me again, and it's like, okay, I guess he's thinking something's gonna be opened up by June or something. I said, well,
Yeah.
maybe, but like, yeah, I'm open to it. So are you gonna be playing like your local zone of places where
Yeah,
if
I'm
you're
gonna
gonna
be
play
my
some,
own booker.
you're gonna be on Booker? Are you gonna kind of play like your local area, or you try to go further out?
Well, yeah, since this would be my first Brown Boy show, I'm not really sure exactly how I would do it. If I would just like take a little DJ controller and play the tracks, or actually take my like Ableton Push or um, my Digitact and load up a whole set on there. Probably the Ableton Push. Um, but
Yeah, I think that's a good
that's
way to do it.
the whole point of doing the local shows is just kind of iron out the kinks, and then the plan would be obviously I'm in Rochester, Buffalo, Syracuse, Ithaca, New York, Toronto, LA, London.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, like I used to lug around like my whole rig. I got like road cases,
Yeah,
and so I can bring all my mugs and stuff because they have like cases for them. but like there was always expensive because I get roadie, I got to get a van, and so like now I've been looking at like MPCs, um, and different controllers, like even like Roland has like the MC707,
Yeah,
and I could just put an Arturia on that and then just bring a bunch of stuff into my MC707 or get an MPC and load everything into that, and then maybe bring like an Arturia keyboard and
a
maybe
little MIDI
one
controller.
Euro, yeah. And I got a Euro rack that goes into a road case. And so I was like, okay, well, I'll bring that Euro rack so I can be authentic and like kick off some crazy, live analog stuff and actually play it. And so yeah, I've got a road case for my Euro rack just so I can actually do that, because that's why one of my whole claim to fame is like I'm not a DJ. I'm a synthesist. So if I come out there with my road rack with that rack and that modular stuff, then I can actually you know hit them with like that heavy synth stuff
Yeah.
and actually play it. But
Well, yeah, I mean that's the plan to just play out once it's safe to. I don't want to gather people together and have them get sick, but um, I'm trying to put together a set with probably a few synthesizers triggered by Ableton
mm-hmm.
or my Digitech.
Yeah, so you use the grid, like a grid controller, like the Ableton push. That's like a grid controller, right?
Yeah,
Yeah, because
it's a
like
little bit. It's more than that for sure. It's that could be your drum pads, that could be your actual
yeah, you
keys,
can.
but it is a grid. Yeah,
Yeah, it's kind of like I think there's a bunch of those controllers now they make, and yeah, you can zone them out to have the drum control, bass control, chord
yeah,
control, and then you can then you actually can live perform stuff compared to like a CDJ. I do prefer. I think that is a better way because it gives you then you actually have the connection that
exactly. I
live.
don't know what I would
Yeah,
do with like a actual DJ controller. Just like press play and then switch to the
yeah, you
next song and then
jump
switch
up
to the
and
next song.
down,
Yeah,
jump up and down, get a helmet.
yeah. It doesn't really feel like I'm a musician. It just kind of feels like I'm pressing play.
Well,
I could bring a
it's more
tape
like
up.
you're an M. It's the old. Well, it's not even like you're an MC more than even a DJ, because the old school DJs actually on vinyl actually had to do something. But with the
Yeah,
CDJs, you can kind of go on automatic if you want to. You don't. You could become more dynamic if you want to, but a lot of people I've seen is just they don't really do a lot of interaction with the gear. It's all kind of preset, um, and so that's kind of disappointing. And so I really am more into seeing somebody perform, because I like to see. I'm back in the day. I go see the Allman Brothers. I go see Funkadelic live, and I want to see them play. So that's my preference. Though I know there's some people that can get into the club scene and I like that. But as a musician, I think it's more fun if you actually can play.
yeah.
And I think most musicians would tell you that they want to play. They don't want to press play. They want to play.
Yeah, I mean, I'm an artist, and I play instruments. I've never taken an instrument lesson, and I've gotten this far, so I want to show off that
Yeah, that's the whole
ability.
thing. Have you thought about doing any of the live stuff that people do nowadays? I know there's a lot of different people doing like these live shows, streaming shows.
Yeah, streaming.
I Yeah, and I've also seen like in
I,
LA, they have like drive-in performances where people actually play on stage. Like the artist is on stage, but everybody's in their car,
hmm,
and you actually can play
yeah,
on a
I'm
stage.
open to it.
And yeah, that seems kind of cool.
Absolutely. I mean, that's the best part about the modern era. Like you have to adapt. You have to like you can't just let like everybody not being able to leave their house stop you from actually getting to your money.
Well, yeah. I mean, there's a bunch of places now they're actually doing like you book it. Like I can't get to England, but there's all these like BBC studios that are doing live. Bands are coming in, like the Gorillas went and did this big concert in this warehouse, and then they streamed it live. But the full band was in the warehouse, and they just streamed the performance like worldwide. And there's
Yeah,
other
could you
bands.
imagine 20 years ago if COVID hit, you'd have no way of actually doing you would sell DVDs, that
Yeah, yeah.
it's not quite the same. So it's definitely probably one of the best times to be a musician.
Yeah, I
I,
think
I want to.
you definitely get more opportunities. Yeah,
I want to see how COVID has changed the live performance. Like, will there be more options to stream from a live concert to
I
sell
think they're
more
gonna
tickets or
have
something
to.
like that?
I definitely think they're gonna have to because I think that even when the live performances come back, they're not gonna have capacity. Like everybody's not gonna be just like arm to arm, shoulder to shoulder. They're gonna limit their capacity. Even with the vaccines, I've read that they want to keep protocols up to like 2022, 2023. So it's gonna have to be a coordination of live streaming and people there, maybe half the house there or a third of the house there, and that's that kind of sucks, but that's kind of what it is until you get 70% vaccination, roster, and it has to be worldwide because we're a global community. And so this
Yeah,
problem is like if you don't get everybody, then you can still get sick. So, that's just kind of what it is. But yeah, we'll figure it out. I think a lot of people are trying to do cool stuff. I've seen people doing rooftop performances and filming them, drive-in theater performances, from your house performance, from your garage, and monetizing it, through Patreon and different things. Yeah, there's a lot of stuff that can happen. So hopefully we'll be on the cutting edge of that.
that's what I'm hoping for.
So, like, I'm glad to have you on the program. We're gonna put the link to your Spotify and also your main link to your music, which I believe you have like a link tree that we're
Yeah,
gonna include. We'll include the direct link to Strange Drugs, and yeah, we'll push this on all the platforms we're on. We're on 11 platforms. And we are part of Spotify. We're actually part of it. Anchor is that part of that company, but we actually do push this podcast out to Apple, Google Play, Radio Public, like 11 platforms, and we push out automatically. So we'll get this out there and get you a wider audience, which is
thank you
what
so
we like to
much.
do. And
Absolutely.
within like an hour, we'll have it. Sometimes it's like less than that, and we'll send you the top 3 links: the one for Spotify, the one for Apple, and the one for Anchor.
I
And then
appreciate it, man.
you can do whatever you want with them, and we'll push it on our channel as well. As if you see, we always push our interviews on our channel, so on Instagram. So thank you for being on the program. We usually follow up with everybody we talk to. So with 6 months or 3 months from now, if you're doing something or your new music's out, feel free to contact us and we can help push it.
Thank you so much. It's been a pleasure, man.